What's up, Domino community? I'm Lily Hevish, and today I'll be teaching you how to build a domino wall using the column technique. So get your dominoes and let's start building. This is part 2 of my domino wall tutorial series. If you haven't seen part 1 about the alternating technique, definitely check that out over here first because I go way more in depth about how to make a domino wall. In this video, I'll be sharing a slightly different method for building a domino wall and sharing all the advantages and disadvantages of using the column technique versus the alternating technique. So let's start by placing the first row of dominoes. In the same way as the alternating technique, we're just gonna place horizontal dominoes, one domino height apart. And again, you can use another domino as a measurement to sort of see the spacing in between dominoes and make sure that it is exactly one domino height from edge to edge. Now, I will say it is important to make the very first layer really precise, make sure it's measured out evenly and spacing looks good, because if you don't have an even base layer, then the entire wall is going to be sort of shifted and not really as even or reliable to build. So pay very close attention to the first layer. Once it looks good, then move on to the second layer. The next step is just like the alternating technique. We're gonna place horizontal dominoes on the edge of the dominoes, like so, and then place another one on the other side. And we want to make sure, again, that everything looks very square, that we don't have dominoes hanging off the edge or angled too far in the middle. When I place a domino in a wall, I try to think of each one as like a square and a block. So like this is one cell, for example, that would be another cell. And once again, my hand position, I'm using my index finger and middle finger on one side and my thumb on the opposite side to hold the domino and place it very gently on top. Now the third layer, we're just gonna repeat the first layer. The column technique is a little bit easier than the alternating technique because it repeats every other layer rather than every 4 layers. So we're gonna place another horizontal domino, parallel, like so. And see again how I'm moving my body so I'm in line with the domino that I'm placing. That'll help me to make sure that I can see where the dominoes are, make sure everything looks straight, very parallel with each other. If I were to be reaching over like this and placing a domino, I might not be able to tell that it's not like perfectly even. And it's sort of a weird angle to place dominoes, so always make sure your body is in line with the domino that you're placing. And for hand position, placing these parallel dominoes, I'm holding it with my middle finger and my thumb and just very gently placing it on top. And if you're building a structure that seems a little risky and you want to be very safe, you can always put your index finger and your ring finger around the domino like this and place the domino so there's sort of like a barrier in case it does fall, like that. Because if it falls over left or right, one of my fingers will catch it and it won't go into the wall. Sometimes I do that when I'm building the final dominoes, or if I know it's really, really tall and I just need that safety net, I'll go like this. But generally I do find it more comfortable and a little bit faster to hold it with my middle finger and thumb. All right, and now we can start making the column. So instead of putting the dominoes on the alternating side, we're gonna put the dominoes in this layer on the same side. So this is what makes the column. I'm gonna place this orange domino right here. And you'll notice that there's one domino gap in between. If I were to put it here, this would be the alternating technique, but by putting it here on the same side, we now create a column. And now we just keep repeating. I think I'm gonna build this wall up to 13 layers high. I would recommend making it at least 13 layers to make sure that the wall falls properly. If you build it lower than 13 layers, there's a chance that it could lock up because there might not be enough dominoes to crumble over and continue knocking over dominoes in the wall. Depending on the dominoes that you use, you might need to build it taller or shorter, so just do some tests and see what works for you. With H5 domino creations, I will say 13 layers should work, so just make sure that's your minimum height if you're making a wall. But also the precision does matter, so make sure you're not building dominoes, you know, all scrunched up like this, because that's gonna make it more stable and not fall over. So just double check your walls, make sure everything looks even, everything is square from the top, and that it looks all good to go. So let's build it a little bit higher. Alright, so we're at 13 layers now. So this domino wall should work. If I were to continue building it up, I could make a 2D pyramid, or I could keep building it out on the side by adding more layers like this. Now this is different from the alternating technique because the wall creates columns. You can kind of see, like, if you go vertically, this is a column, this is a column, this is a column. Now with the column technique, it's a little bit more difficult to make it a square end cap on the side, but there is a workaround. However, it doesn't exactly follow the grid-like structure of the domino wall. What you can do is put a sideways domino on top of the first layer, like so, and you will notice that this domino is hanging over the edge. That's the only way that this is going to work. It may look a little odd from the front angle, but if you want to hide the end cap, then you can build it so this side, the one that's facing away from the camera, is the front view. So this green domino is sort of like a step where now I can place another blue domino on top, and this is just continuing the third layer. So now I can put another domino on top on the other side, continue the wall here, and again we're going to put another green domino and place it on top of the blue domino overhanging, and then another blue domino on top of that, just continuing the next layer. Now something I like to do if I'm building a wall that's really tall is every 6 layers I'll put a crossing domino on the end cap to make it a bit more sturdy, because if you put all of these horizontal dominoes on the side and it's a very tall wall, that could actually become unstable. So by putting a crossing domino on it like this, and you will see it is sort of angled on the square. This actually holds the domino wall together and makes sure that the end cap won't tip over by accident. And now we can just keep repeating and making the end cap a little bit taller. Now you could technically put that angled pink domino on every other layer rather than every 6 layers, but I find that putting that on every other layer makes the wall too sturdy, and sometimes you'll see the domino wall falls and then there's like a single tower that just doesn't fall. So to avoid that, just do it every 6 layers instead of every other layer. So in my tutorial on the alternating technique, I showed you how to knock down the wall using string and field starters and pulling out a domino. But for this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to knock it down using just a domino line. Now this only works if you have one domino on the edge. You can't really knock down a domino wall with a line when it's fully built up like this, but if it's just one layer at the bottom, you can simply just put a domino line in front of it and knock it down. You could have a domino line come in the same direction as the domino wall. I generally like to put about 1 domino thickness of space in between the first domino and the horizontal domino that starts the wall. And this domino is right in the middle of the blue domino. The main thing is we just don't want this domino to interfere with this orange domino here, because we want to knock down the blue domino. Once we have that, we can just continue building the line. And again, if this is your first time building a domino wall, I do recommend doing some tests, making sure that your trigger will work before you make it in a really big setup. This method, while it does work most of the time, sometimes there is a chance that it could lock up. As an alternative, if you wanted to knock it down in a different way, you could knock out this orange domino by placing a domino sort of inside the domino wall here. Again, this is right in the middle in line with the orange domino, and then just continue building the line. So by doing this, the green dominoes will completely knock out this orange domino, which pulls the one underneath to fall over, and then it just makes a whole chain reaction. I do think this method is a little bit more reliable just because it's knocking down the second layer rather than the first layer. So if you do have a choice, I would recommend this one. This is also kind of nice because you can knock it down on a 90-degree angle rather than straight towards the wall. Just make sure you build the domino line inside the wall here. Like, we wouldn't want to build the domino line on this side and knock it down in this direction, because then that way the orange domino is falling towards the inside of the wall rather than falling out of the wall. So just be mindful of where it's falling and make sure that it's always falling away from the wall. So this is the column technique. Let's knock it down. Yeah, very, very smooth. So if we watch this in slow motion, the green domino line knocks down the orange domino, which then the blue domino on top of that no longer has a support, so then that falls over, and then that topples more dominoes above it, and it just kind of crumbles in a chain reaction to make the whole domino wall topple over. I typically like the column technique when I know I'm building a wall that doesn't need a square end cap, just because it's much easier to build. You know, you don't really have to think about where to place the domino. And I think the column technique actually falls a little bit easier than the alternating technique, which can sometimes lock up, especially if it's not as precise. However, the disadvantage to the column technique is that it could be a little bit less sturdy because the columns are all like weighted on one side every other row rather than alternating, which sort of like distributes the weight in a way, which makes it easier to build really, really tall structures. Now, it is still possible to make a really tall wall using the column technique. You may remember this video from a few years ago where I made this giant menorah wall. This uses the column technique as well as the end cap method, and I just wanted to see how large I can make a domino wall using the column technique. I did have to make sure that every row was perfectly straight and even, so I would look at it from the side on a 90-degree angle and make sure that it looked perfect. And if it didn't, I'd shift over dominoes, make sure everything was balanced, and then I kept building up. One advantage for the column technique is that by having the columns on one side, it actually allows you to read things easier on walls. So sometimes you'll see me use the column technique for just making something that you really need to see it well. I also prefer the column technique when I'm making a wall that I know needs to turn. It's really easy to make wavy domino walls using the column technique because all the dominoes are on the same side, which allows you to kind of play around with the spacing. It doesn't need to be exactly a square. And lastly, the column technique is really useful for combining with the diagonal technique. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it right over here. That'll be coming soon. Combining the different wall techniques is sometimes useful if you want to make more irregular shapes with domino walls. I personally really like the column technique method. If I'm just building a normal wall, I would probably go with this method unless I really need a perfect square corner that requires the alternating technique, and I don't want to use this like funky method. All in all, it's all a preference. If you have different views on when to use the column technique versus the alternating technique, definitely leave it down below in the comments. I would love to hear all of your thoughts. One thing to note, building structures is going to be much easier if you're using professional toppling dominoes. So I do recommend my very own H5 domino creations. These are made specifically for toppling and they have very precise corners, so you'll be able to build structures that are very tall. These are made in collaboration with Spin Master. You can get them at hevish5.com/buydominoes. You can check out my other domino tutorials over here, as well as the diagonal technique and the alternating technique. I want to give a shout out to our featured community member, Blue Domino Lab, who's fairly new to this community and has been making some awesome stuff, so please go support their channel. As always, I'm Lily Hevish, and keep on building.